Madam President, you can count on Kenya's full support throughout your tenure as you steer the Assembly into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, 8 years ago, in the aftermath of the unprecedented global destruction and devastating war, the international community came together in hope. They created this organization, the United Nations, as a shield against the horrors of war, as a platform for dialogue, and as a bridge to a better, fairer, more secure global community. What is often forgotten or not mentioned today is that the United Nations grew out of the failure of the League of Nations that existed between 1919 and 1945. The League of Nations did not collapse for lack of good intentions or noble objectives. Formed at the end of the First World War and as part of the Treaty of Versailles, it was humanity's first attempt to build a permanent international organization to stop aggression and war and bring nations together. Its ambitions were to achieve collective global security, disarmament, peaceful dispute resolution, and cooperation on humanitarian and social issues. Despite these ideals, the League of Nations failed. The United States never joined, other great powers came and went, and without enforcement authority, its condemnation carried little weight. When Japan invaded Manchuria, when Italy marched into Ethiopia, and when Hitler openly defied its rules, the League stood by, helpless and powerless. By the late 1930s, its credibility had collapsed, and with the outbreak of the World War II, it was rendered irrelevant. Madam President, this history is both a lesson and a warning. Institutions rarely fail because they lack vision or ideals. More often, they drift into irrelevance when they do not adapt, when they hesitate to act, and when they lose legitimacy. To remain relevant, institutions must be reimagined, must be reformed, renewed, and aligned with emerging realities. 8 decades ago, the founders of the UN sought to correct the failures of the League of Nations by creating a stronger, more inclusive organization anchored in the principles of, and I quote, "We the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war," end of quote. Today, we are gathered for the UN at 80. The question is unavoidable. Is the United Nations relevant to the demands of our time? Can it continue to serve humanity in the face of current realities? Or has it become a relic of a bygone era? Madam President, Excellencies, we meet against a grim global backdrop. Conflict rages in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and beyond. Climate disasters grow fiercer by the day. Inequality deepens, pandemics loom, and technological disruptions outpaces governance. Instead of trust, mistrust is spreading. Instead of solidarity, fragmentation is taking root. In place of hope, anxiety fills our global community. We are living, to borrow from the words of the founders of this institution, not in larger freedom, but in growing uncertainty. At this moment of turbulence, when we most need a strong United Nations, the organization faces its deepest crisis in credibility and capacity. Funding cuts have paralyzed its operations. Bureaucracy has slowed its response. The Security Council remains frozen in the post-war structures of 1945, unable to act inclusively, with fairness, and with speed. Ladies and gentlemen, I can, however, state with absolute conviction that the United Nations has been one of humanity's greatest achievements. For 8 decades, it has held back the specter of global war, calmed conflicts from Cambodia to Liberia, and stood guard in some of the world's most dangerous places through the courage of its peacemakers and peacekeepers. Few institutions in humanity's history can claim such a legacy. The United Nations has stood at the front lines of humanitarian crisis, from famine relief in the Horn of Africa to emergency shelter for millions of Syrian and Ukrainian refugees. It was at the forefront in the eradication of smallpox, coordinated global responses to HIV and AIDS, Ebola, and COVID-19, and continues to champion universal vaccination. Its agencies have advanced women's rights, protected children, safeguarded refugees, and set global norms on everything from disarmament to climate action. The UN Sustainable Development Goals remain a shared blueprint for human progress. These are achievements no nation could have achieved alone, however rich, however great, or however powerful. And yet, every institution, no matter how noble its origins or impactful its legacy, must adapt to changing times or slide into irrelevance. Today, the United Nations stands at a crossroads of renewal on one hand or decay on another. Put differently, after 80 years, the rhymes of time are calling on us to reimagine the original promise that inspired the founding of the United Nations, and that is the quest for global peace, development, and human rights. But this call must now be answered in a global context that is profoundly different from the post-war era in which the UN was conceived then. We would be denying the cold, hard truth if we say that the United Nations is delivering as it should. On peace and security, its voice is too often drowned by the rivalries of great powers, while some nations simply ignore its resolutions and do as they please. Too often, the UN's blue helmet, once a symbol of moral authority, no longer commands the same respect. From the conflicts in Gaza to Ukraine, to the crisis in Sudan, DRC Congo, Somalia, and the Sahel, we see actors proceed undeterred by the United Nations calls. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Kenya speaks from the experience of a nation deeply invested in multilateralism. For decades, we have placed our troops and police in harm's way for peacekeeping missions across Africa and beyond, from Somalia to Democratic Republic of Congo, from South Sudan to most recently in our neighborhood here in Haiti. Over the past 15 months, we are proud to have led the multinational security support mission in Haiti, not because it has been easy, but because solidarity is the essence of the United Nations. Madam President, the mandate of the MSS mission is coming to an end in a few days. As the lead nation, allow me to briefly share our experiences, the successes and the challenges, as both a cautionary tale and a living lesson about the strengths and weaknesses of the current global security governance architecture.
If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail.
Donald Trump is fighting everyone, including President William Ruto.
And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything.
When Trump rolled into the UN General Assembly in New York, he aimed at everything from climate science to Palestinian statehood, and somehow roping Kenya's William Ruto into the chaos. He opened fire on climate science, branding it a massive global hoax, and painted carbon-cutting policies as a slow suicide pact for economies.
Global warming, not happening. You know, it used to be global cooling. If you look back years ago in the 1920s and the 1930s, they said, global cooling will kill the world. We have to do something. Then they said global warming will kill the world. But then it started getting cooler, so now they could just call it climate change, because that way they can't miss. It's climate change. Because if it goes higher or lower, whatever the hell happens, there's climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that. No more global warming, no more global cooling. All of these predictions made by the United Nations and many others, often for bad reasons, were wrong.
And that was just Act 1. He then accused the UN of rewarding terrorism by recognizing Palestine, claiming such moves validated Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel.
Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, they have taken so much. This could have been solved so long ago.
He demanded the release of Israeli hostages, offered zero room for ceasefire dialogue, and brushed aside the 150-plus UN member states who already recognize Palestinian statehood.
But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
Now, where does President Ruto enter this drum-sized lecture? Let's rewind. Ruto has spent the last 2 years building his international brand around climate advocacy. At the same UN General Assembly, he gave a passionate speech urging reform of global institutions, championing Africa's voice in climate negotiations, and pushing for climate justice.
On debt and fiscal space, we are told that 60% of climate finance should come from domestic resources. This is manifestly unfair because much of this burden is being placed on countries that have contributed the least to the climate crisis.
He called out the imbalance. Africa emits less than 4% of global emissions, but pays the highest price in floods, droughts, and famine.
Our greatest opportunity lies in growing and diversifying our economies through climate-positive growth, turning the very solutions to climate change into engines of development.
Now, this wasn't new for Ruto. In 2023, he hosted the inaugural Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, an event that brought together 30,000 delegates, over 24 heads of states, and enough carbon credit talk to send half of Twitter into a spiral.
When we started this conversation about reforming the global financial architecture, many people thought we were mad. But we were not mad. The world today appreciates that there is something fundamentally wrong.
He pitched Africa's forests and natural resources as assets that could rake in $6 to $100 billion annually through carbon markets.
To be able to unlock the resources that we need to be able to drive these new investment and financing opportunities, especially for green energy. We believe it is time to have a conversation about carbon tax.
Kenyans, meanwhile, were still Googling what carbon markets and carbon credits meant, while MPs on national TV struggled to explain it.
We, as we all aware, is that it's climate change, yeah, right? Because you find like by the way, climate change is real because of the global warming. I think I was in Mombasa last week, and it was so cold. So I asked them, what's not happening? They told me it's because of ati ice, ati jua imekuwa mingi, ice ina melt, ikisha melt, so nini inakuwa baridi. So global climate is real, and whatever people are going to be told here, if they're going to implement, well, for the...
Fast forward to Trump's speech, and the message couldn't be clearer. Everything Ruto has been selling, Trump now labels as scam. Climate policy, trash. Climate policy, trash. Carbon markets, a con. Africa's green ambitions, a bad investment.
The entire globalist concept of asking successful industrialized nations to inflict pain on themselves and radically disrupt their entire societies must be rejected completely and totally, and it must be immediate. That's why in America I withdrew from the fake Paris Climate Accord, where, by the way, America was paying so much more than every country. And I'm telling you that if you don't get away from the green energy scam, your country is going to fail. And if you don't stop people that you've never seen before, that you have nothing in common with, your country is going to fail.
No names were mentioned, but the slap landed anyway.
Let that happen any longer. You're doing it because you want to be nice. You want to be politically correct, and you're destroying your heritage.
And the tensions didn't stop there. Ruto has been walking a fine line on the Israel-Palestine issue, balancing diplomacy with discretion. But moments after Trump scorched countries recognizing Palestine, Ruto posted a statement that landed squarely against the MAGA grain. We support the pursuit of lasting stability in the Middle East through a two-state solution. Kenya has recognized the statehood of Palestine since 1989. And so, Ruto finds himself in a familiar position, caught up between two tectonic plates. On one side, his vision for Africa, climate leadership, diplomatic balance, green finance.
Expert review on debt, nature, and climate. The ideas and knowledge are already on the table. What is missing is action.
On the other side, a resurgent Trump presidency that has no time for carbon credits, consensus, or cautious neutrality.
Global warming, not happening.
Under Biden, Ruto got red carpets and NATO-lite status. With Trump back, he gets ignored at best and contradicted at worst. One day you are hosting Hollywood in Nairobi and launching billion-dollar climate frameworks. Next, you are watching Trump call your flagship policy a scam in front of the world.
And they talk about, again, global warming and the carbon footprint. It's a con job.
Welcome to the New World Order. And for Ruto, the balancing act just goes